Hey, I think we're going to get started. We don't want to run late. So first of all, hello, everyone. My name is Ida Fernandez, and I'm the Executive Director for the Imagine SPORE Network. So thank you for everyone joining us today, and welcome to today's session in our network's webinar training series aimed at improving future research studies and building skills for our network members. We're truly excited about today's talk on engaging and partnering with Indigenous community members to advance GI research. But first, just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So please ensure to keep yourself on mute throughout the presentation so that we can minimize any background noise. There'll be about 10-15 minutes allotted at the end of the session for some question and answers. So we encourage you to type in your questions using the chat box at the bottom of your screen at any point throughout the presentation. Just enter your questions in there, and then I'll read them out to our presenters to answer at the end of their presentations. Following the meeting, you'll receive a link to complete an evaluation survey. So please give us your feedback so that we can continue to improve these sessions moving forward. Also, the survey responses allow us to track participation for those seeking CanMEDS credits. Finally, we do record these sessions and we archive them on our website for future viewing. So please visit imaginespore.com if you'd like to share it with your colleagues who weren't able to join us today, or you can also check out our previous training sessions too. So a little bit about who we are. If you can move to the next slide, that'd be great. Perfect. So the Imagine Network is investigating the interactions between inflammation, microbiome, diet, and mental health in patients with inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel syndrome. Our mission is to transform the overall management of IBD and IBS and the associated mental health issues that are impacted by these disorders. Our webinar topic today is quite timely as our network has initiated phase 2. This next phase is focused on mobilizing and implementing research results from phase 1 into practice. As such, this requires that we increase our collaboration with patients and community groups, including Indigenous community members. We are really excited about this next stage, and we'll be sharing more with you about our evolution in the weeks to come. But before we get started with the presentations, I'd first like to introduce you to our presenters today. First off, Dr. Melissa Tremblay is the scientific lead of our Imagine Network's Indigenous Engagement Working Group. She's an assistant professor in the school and clinical child psychology program at the University of Alberta, a registered psychologist, and Indigenous liaison with the Canada FASD Research Network. Joining her are patient partner representatives and committee members on our Indigenous Engagement Working Group, Rhonda Desjarlais and Dr. Juan-Nicolás Peña-Sánchez. Rhonda is a past graduate from the University of Calgary's Patient and Community Engagement Research Program, and Dr. Peña-Sánchez is a faculty member in the Department of Community Health and Epidemiology at University of Saskatchewan's College of Medicine. Finally, I would also like to welcome Robert Porter, a member of the York Factory First Nation and an Indigenous family advocate on the IBD Indigenous People Research Team. So I'd like to pass it off over to Melissa to get us started on today's session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So just to begin here, we have no disclosures. And these are the CanMEDS roles that apply. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to begin with a land acknowledgement. And it's on land like this that I'm reminded of how grateful I am to call this land my home. So I will just acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others. And we have other meeting participants and colleagues connecting from other treaty lands as well. So these are not just words that are spoken at the beginning of a presentation or a meeting, but a representation of a commitment to honoring and reflecting on the relationship we have to treaties, the land and its gifts, as well as the Indigenous peoples who continue to enrich our communities. So our acknowledgement is not only in respectful recognition of the lands on which we live, work, and play, along with our current, past, and future ancestors of these lands, but is also in recognition that we have a collective responsibility to take concrete actions toward uplifting the connections that we have with all of our relations. And it's through research, clinical work, and more broadly, advocacy that we aim to take some of these concrete actions. Next slide, please. So we have 3 learning objectives for you today. First, by the end of this session, we're aiming for you to understand some of the tenets of community-based research with Indigenous communities. Second, we'd like to promote recognition of the need to work with Indigenous community members as research partners in order to advance GI research. And finally, we want to identify healthcare utilization disparities between First Nations individuals with IBD and those in the general population with IBD. Next slide. So with these objectives in mind, this is our outline of what we'll cover. First, I'm going to go over some of the tenets of community-based research with Indigenous communities. In the second part of our webinar, Rhonda will give you some perspectives and recommendations from her position as an Indigenous community advocate. In the third part, Juan-Nicolás and Robert will talk about the pathway and work of the IBD among Indigenous peoples research team. And then finally, they'll end with some thoughts about how we can work with Indigenous community members before we have some time for Q&A. So with that, I'll spend the first part of our webinar, as I mentioned, going over some of the tenets of community-based research with Indigenous communities. So I wanted to start by introducing myself, which for me involves introducing my family. These are a couple of images that kind of describe who I am. So the picture you see on your left is a picture of my parents holding my oldest brother. They were only 14 and 18 years old when they had my brother in the 70s, so they were teen parents, and then continued to have 4 more children, including me. There's also pictures of my 3 children on this slide. So I have a 4-year-old son, a 6-year-old son, and an almost 2-year-old daughter. And then I also have a picture of my Métis sash. So my dad is Cree and Métis with roots mostly west of Edmonton in Alberta and is part of the Lac-Saint-Anne Métis community. And my mom is French. So I am Métis. Métis people are recognized as a group of Indigenous peoples in Canada. That being said, like any Indigenous person, I'm coming to you today with specific lived experiences and layers of privilege as a university faculty member. And I don't ever claim to work or to speak for any Indigenous person or community. Indigenous identity in Canada is complex, as are the experiences of the incredibly diverse Indigenous peoples in this country. So that idea is really important to thread throughout the webinar today. Next slide. So just by way of background, although most or all of us tuning in today are likely already aware, the term Indigenous in Canada refers to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. In 2021, the census counted more than 1.8 million Indigenous peoples in Canada, or about 5% of the country's total population. And this is a relatively fast-growing population. Next slide. I also wanted to make a note about what we might call Pan-Indigenous approaches. So that is to say, approaches that look at all Indigenous peoples as a group, rather than distinguishing between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, or between different communities and unique Indigenous cultures. The potential benefit of this kind of approach is that Indigenous peoples from different backgrounds can form alliances and work together. And we see this sometimes in healthcare, politics, or economic arenas. But even though there may be many common elements to Indigenous worldviews, for example, the emphasis that's placed on spirituality and relationality, there's no one approach. So Indigenous worldviews and ways of knowing are rooted in their individual contexts, histories, locations, and experiences. So we have to be aware that if we take a Pan-Indigenous approach, we're sometimes failing to appreciate that every community is different. And we risk coming up with kind of blanket statement research that doesn't take into account the unique realities of specific communities. And this can cause some confusion. So this all just really brings home the importance of considering a community's unique context at the outset of a project, and that a one-size-fits-all approach to research will not work when we're designing or implementing a research project. So we have to appropriately allocate time and resources to understand and build competency about the local context in advance of determining a research approach. So we just have to learn from the communities that we're working with. Next slide. So this is also important because of the serious and intractable harms that have been enacted on Indigenous peoples in the name of research. So as Indigenous scholar Linda Tuai Smith has remarked, research is probably one of the dirtiest words in the Indigenous world's vocabulary. Next slide. So researchers conventionally have really told a colonial story, right? As researchers, for myself as a clinician as well, we're often taught to be deficit-focused, problem-centered, reactive, to pathologize people in difficult social circumstances. But although research can be a tool for colonization, research can also be used as a tool for reshaping the narrative about Indigenous health and wellness and taking a critical lens to the colonial story that we so often hear about Indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples have inherited wisdom and through our ancestors that have survived generations of colonization, and that speaks to our strength and resilience, and we can bring that to the table in research. And so if we're going to do meaningful research with Indigenous communities, we have to recognize that Indigenous peoples have knowledge that the world can use right now and honor that with our research approaches. There's some overarching principles or concepts that can help us do that. So the concept of an ethical space was developed by Indigenous scholar Willie Ermine to describe a space that's formed when two worldviews engage with one another. And he talks about how it's the space between different worldviews where dialogue can take place. Second, I appreciate this concept of two-eyed seeing developed by Mi'kmaq elder Albert Marshall. So this is described as learning to see from one eye with the strengths of Indigenous knowledges and ways of being, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western knowledges, and learning to use both eyes together to enable collaborative work. Next slide. So I'm going to spend the rest of my few minutes here just talking about what that can actually look like in practice. We use the term relationality a lot when we're talking about working with Indigenous people, but what does relationality mean? Relationality is about acknowledging the whole person in relation to our spirit, our physical and emotional wellness, in relation to other people, other generations, how we're always existing in a web of relationships. If we're thinking from Indigenous worldviews, we're always in relationship. And so that complicates the ideas of objectivity and neutrality that we're often trained to cling to as researchers. So relationships are central to Indigenous approaches to research. I can't overemphasize the power of simply being present, having meetings in community in Indigenous spaces. That's where relationships grow. And through the formation of relationships, we can facilitate the collection of more meaningful data potentially than could be gathered without these relationships, even if many of us have been trained as researchers to be as quote unquote objective or distant as possible. Next slide. So in order to navigate some of these issues, I think we have to practice reflexivity, critically reflect on different roles and relationships we're entering into, and consider the purpose. So we have to be aware of the potential for making assumptions. The fact that I'm partnering with an Indigenous community doesn't mean that the community has had prior experience with research or that they're struggling with certain social issues. There's such huge diversity. Also, colonization is not relegated to the past. So we need to think critically about how may we be contributing on an ongoing basis to colonization through research. As an academic, I've been trained in the very worldviews that have been imposed on Indigenous peoples through colonization. So reflecting on that and asking hard questions about my own knowledge. So how do I know what I know? Where did I get my knowledge from? How do I determine what sources of knowledge are credible and what values underlie my perspectives? Also, reflexivity and humility go hand in hand. So the people that I work with want to know that I'm willing to learn, admit my mistakes, and try to improve. That means recognizing when a certain method that I might have planned out falls flat, and I need to go back to the drawing board and think about adjusting my methods to be responsive to the community I'm working with. And then positioning myself as a learner, not as an expert who's going to come into a community telling people what's going on. not taking for granted that I know what a meaningful research project should look like, but exploring that and learning that together with community partners. Next slide. Accountability is also huge. So here I'm talking about responsibility to learn about the culture and ways of knowing of the community I'm working with. I'm talking reciprocity. We often talk about projects being mutually beneficial, but we need to unpack what that means. So maybe for community partners, that means they're benefiting from learning about academic research, if that's of interest to them, or through the project, they maybe negotiate and take on leadership roles. Maybe it's about sustainability, so ensuring initiatives are sustainable beyond research funding timeframes, for example. And something that I've learned through this work is that we need more than good intentions. We also have to do the work to understand the territory we're on, past experiences and current inequities, and using the language is not enough. So saying we're moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation doesn't mean much unless we follow that with action. And something as well that we know is that we need an extensive amount of time to do this work well in order to prioritize that accountability. Next slide. So just to end my piece here, I want to emphasize the importance of Indigenous-centered solutions to the topics that we're researching. So in this way, research can be incredibly meaningful when it's community defined, when traditional knowledge is centered, when we can celebrate and affirm Indigenous ways of knowing through research, and when we can shine a light on the resilience and strengths of Indigenous communities rather than contributing to a deficit-based narrative. Also, engagement can occur at the outset of a project. So members of the community can be the ones to determine the purpose and methods of a research study and can be involved at all stages of a project through to sharing findings. And that may look like engaging an advisory group throughout the process, recognizing that although the research team may bring technical expertise to the project, it may be a community or a program or community members that are the experts in their own health issues. So with that, I will pass it over to Rhonda to provide some of her own perspectives.
Good morning, everyone. And for those in and around Alberta, and good afternoon to those who are in the Toronto area. I would like to start off by saying thank you for joining this webinar on this beautiful day. I will start off with my introduction. As you heard, my name is Rhonda Desjarlais. I'm a Métis from East Prairie Métis Settlement, Alberta. It is one of only 8 Métis settlements with land based in all of Canada. I am situated in the Treaty 8 area, which has a massive land base. I am 48 years of age. I have 3 children and soon to be 4 grandchildren. I have a passion to work with any type of group or agency that centers around Indigenous people. I feel having an Indigenous persons gives more of an insight to who we are and how we engage as Indigenous people. I'm hoping that the more research I take part in expands the knowledge and insight to non-Indigenous peoples. Also, I'm honored to participate with Imagine. When I first received the email about becoming an Indigenous research partner for Imagine, I thought to myself, this looks like a good opportunity. I could be a voice and give input for Indigenous people. So I submitted my name and was gratefully chosen to be an Indigenous research partner. I must say PACER opened up the door to many opportunities, including the Aboriginal research partner for Imagine. I am actually on other committees as well, and that's from PACER opening up the door for myself. So here I am, open to give insight to any barriers or understanding to non-Indigenous peoples. As we are aware, understanding of one's culture brings much more of an understanding. While in the PACER, which is an acronym for Patient and Community Engagement Research, I gained the skills to conduct research and documentation. We did our research in an Indigenous community, Paddle Prairie Métis Settlement, which is in Northern Alberta. That was one of the many unique aspects about PACER. They offered us the tools tools to engage with our own people, and learn to do research with our own Indigenous people. I'm grateful for the research and documentation skills I gained completing the basic program. As an Indigenous community member, I feel in order to understand who we are and who we are as people, we need that connection on any group. The most accurate information any group would gain the most from is having an Indigenous voice. The expectation is that we are heard and that the information shared is word for word and no context is changed. After all, Indigenous input is sought out for a reason and therefore should be honored and shared. I'm glad to say with this group, my expectations as an Indigenous person are met. One thing I would like to share is when engaging be yourself. Any information you may share, if written, would be best written. And the way they may tell you their story or just the way they engage. We are not a complicated people. Aboriginal people love gifts and love to gift others. So don't be shy to come bearing gifts. I would like to say on behalf of Indigenous people, I'm honored that we are sought out to engage. Hi. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, Rhonda. And thank you everyone for being connected to this webinar. Now, Robert and I would like to share our story and learning pathway as part of the IBD and Indigenous Peoples research team.
So, as you all know, IBD is a chronic condition of the digestional tract, which includes the ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease, in which the digestive tract can become inflamed and ulcerated. Anyways, the causes are unknown, but it's widely suggested that it's very much associated with urbanization, modernization, and Western diets. So, lots of research to come on that, but these are our leading culprits. As the slide says, IBD is prevalent in 0.5% in the Western world, but unfortunately it is increasing at a very rapid rate. And the occurs across 4 epidemiological stages: emergence, acceleration and incidence, compounding, prevalence, equilibrium.
Thank you, Rob. So to give an overall idea about the evolution of IBD in Canada and worldwide, the emergence is described as a stage when there are some cases that are appearing sporadically. The second stage is when there is an acceleration in the incidence, so the number of newly diagnosed cases increase very rapidly, and then slowly the number of individuals dealing with the disease, although the prevalence is still important. The total number of people dealing with the condition is somehow low. The third stage, where Canada is right now, it's called compounding prevalence, where the number of newly diagnosed cases is stabilizing or maybe increasing a little bit, but the number of people in total dealing with the condition, it's a chronic condition that doesn't have a cure, but it's not, it doesn't have a high mortality rate, increases very rapidly. So we see a large number of individuals in the population living with this condition. A theoretical stage is the prevalence equilibrium, in which the total number of individuals with the condition is stabilized as well as the incidence. No countries around the world are at this stage. Canada is third stage, and the newly developing countries, newly industrialized countries, marked in the map in orange, are seeing this rapidly increasing the number of people diagnosed with this condition. So as I mentioned before, Canada has one of the highest prevalence and incidence rates of IBD in the world. It has been is described that the total number of individuals in Canada is more than 300,000 people, about 0.82% of the total population. It's projected that this number is going to increase to 1% of the 1.1 of the total Canadian population. So more than 470,000 people will be diagnosed and living with this condition. And this is a projection that has been described for all the provinces across Canada, as you can see in the figure at the right. The number of newly diagnosed cases, on the other hand, is estimated that around 11,000 people are diagnosed with IBD, around 30 per 100,000 individuals every year. This number is expected to increase, not as dramatically in total number, but the rate of new cases is going to continue increasing in Canada so far, expecting to have 14,000 people diagnosed with IBD by 2035. Now, all of this evidence has been centered in general population. A few years when or the research team member colleagues and I were approached by members about, okay, and these are interesting numbers, but you know what is happening among First Nations, among Métis, among Inuits, and other indigenous communities around the world. Interestingly, there was a scarce evidence about this. The available evidence in 2019 was that the prevalence and the incidence were low among these groups of individuals, but nothing else was known about access to care, expectations, how have there been their experience. None of that was described. Furthermore, it is known that the indigenous peoples face barriers to access health care, specialized care specifically, and they are related to the consequence of colonization, stereotypical perceptions among the indigenous community members, communication barriers, language barriers, transportation barriers, among others, including the mistrust in the healthcare system. And recently, as published in the 2023 Impact of IBD report in Canada, community members, individuals living with IBD, science agree that great investment in research on the impact of IBD and indigenous population should be advocated for.
Well, this is my slide here. This is where I'm going to talk about how I got involved with the IBD research group. As you can see, there's pictures of me and my daughter, who unfortunately was one of those statistics that got involved with this. So we lost her 6 years ago, and I was approached by, or we were approached by Juan-Nicolás here to a research group that maybe further our cause and get some knowledge out there about IBD and its terrible effect on the people in general. So, been very happy to be part of this group and it's taken us all over the place. Forward to spreading the word. At this time, we also would like to share a couple other videos here about a couple of other patient advisors that are part of our group.
1 month before my initial diagnosis, I had been feeling the symptoms of Crohn's disease, symptoms such as upset stomachs and fatigue. 2 weeks before my initial diagnosis, I went to a walk-in clinic. I talked to a physician and I explained my symptoms to them and how they had been getting worse. I explained to them what I'd been going through. I wrote down a list and told them. They told me to eat better and drink liquids to recover my electrolytes. They didn't prescribe me any medications, nor did they do any tests. My symptoms were not getting better, only worse. 5 days before my diagnosis, I went to see my family physician. I told them about everything. I was then provided medications, which I feel would have made my symptoms worse. I wasn't being listened to, nor was I being taken seriously. The day I went to the hospital, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I had to go to 2 different hospitals for various testing, and today I'm going through treatments that keep my symptoms under control. I can say that I'm getting the care I needed now, but things could have been significantly different if I was taken seriously a month before my initial diagnosis, when I was feeling these symptoms mildly.
I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease in 2001. When I was first diagnosed, I was told that Indigenous people did not get Crohn's disease and that I probably didn't have it. And I went to see a gastroenterologist who confirmed that I did have Crohn's disease and that it was rare. And a lot of the stuff, all the tests, finding a good gastroenterologist, I've learned that I've had to be an advocate for myself because of my Indigenous standing. And it's a challenge. And challenging finding doctors who believe that I have Crohn's disease and having to convince them that I have Crohn's disease. These are what I need. These are the type of tests I need. These are the type of medications I'm on. And it's so frustrating because a lot of times I had to advocate for myself and there was nobody there to advocate for me. So being involved with this program, this research product empowers me to give voice to Indigenous people who are living with IBD. And I feel if I can be an advocate for them, I said they'll have an easier journey if they're diagnosed with IBD.
So gathering these stories and
This changes everything we know about tinnitus. Neurologists have found that
sorry about that. So all of these stories have shown resilience, advocacy, leadership, diversity, or those who are family members of caregivers of individuals with IBD. We agreed to come together.
Juan-Nicolás, you're really quiet.
Can you hear me now?
It's still everyone. There are other people that are saying it's really quiet as well, so we can't quite make out what you're saying.
What about now?
It's a little better.
Okay. Okay, I will try to speak louder to help with the audio. So taking into account the leadership, advocacy, and resilience of Indigenous community members living with IBD and Indigenous community members who are family members with this condition or caregivers of them, we agree on building a research team to advocate and bring community evidence about IBD among Indigenous members. Based on the medicine wheel, different principles guided our group, including cultural safety, patient-oriented principles, and inspired by the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action number 18 and 19. And in the center of this model, we have Indigenous patient and family advocates who worked in close collaboration with knowledge users, including a gastroenterologist, decision makers, along with Indigenous and non-Indigenous healthcare researchers. All of these model moves towards advocating for better healthcare for Indigenous people living with IBD with community engaged evidence and achieve Mayo-Masha-We, that is a Cree word for good health and well-being. In the group, to achieve this aim, we established different research objectives, and these objectives and the research methods were co-developed and agreed with our Indigenous members engaged in these projects. The first, we agreed to estimate the prevalence, incidence, and the trends over time of IBD among First Nations in Saskatchewan using population-based data to answer if what we were observing in general population is happening among as well among First Nations members or not. Then we wanted to compare healthcare utilization differences between First Nations individuals diagnosed with IBD and those from the general population with pre-existing condition. And the purpose was to demonstrate that there were barriers that were voiced by Indigenous community members, but demonstrated with population-based data and understand them better. At the same time, we wanted to explore the perceptions about IBD among barriers and facilitators to access healthcare among Indigenous people living with IBD. And fourth, we agreed to implement and assess a peer IBD Indigenous patient application program to assist, support, and guide Indigenous people living with IBD.
As the graph here that you see now shows, we have some studies that were put together over a period of time from 1999 to 2016. And you're going to notice that the prevalence has by year, each year has gone up by 4.2% each year. So the annual rate has been about 11 per 100,000 since 1999. So it's something that's on the rise, definitely. A couple other stats about this is that 57% of First Nations diagnosed with this live in urban areas. And of that group, the average age was 41.4 years. And the ratio from ulcerative colitis to Crohn's disease is about 2 to 1 in favor of ulcerative colitis over Crohn's. So it's very interesting numbers.
Furthermore, we heard the voices of Indigenous patients living with IBD about concerns to access specialized care, and using administrative databases, that means all the information that is gathered by the Ministry of Health, we were able to compare the healthcare utilization between those who have First Nation status with those with the general population. And we identified that First Nations diagnosed with IBD had fewer medication claims for IBD and higher risk of hospitalization due to this condition. These findings might reflect barriers to accessing IBD medications, contributing to higher risk of IBD hospitalizations, and in demonstrating inequities to access care, and not because Indigenous individuals do not want to access it, because there might be barriers within the system, racism in the system that are preventing them to have the same care that any individual in general population would have. This study inspires us to move in two directions. Group, the first one, and working on a strength-based approach was to understand the perspectives and the facilitators to access care, and then we are finalizing a portable study with members, which we hope to share soon. And the second one, and thanks to the leadership and incredible advocacy and resilience of our Indigenous community partners, to create and evaluate an Indigenous patient, peer Indigenous Navigator program for individuals living with this condition.
Okay, so we're looking at building some relationships out there, being that we right from our other advocates here have got some experience in this. We would like to become a go-between between helping them feel comfortable and sharing their stories, between patients with this and the healthcare providers, and being an extra voice for these people to help them. Because when you start out on this journey, you don't have a lot of knowledge. Some of our remote communities like that don't have a clue where to go. So we could help these people through our experiences navigate their way through the system and get them pointed in the right direction. And we can point them in the direction for our healthcare providers and get them the help that they need. That's our goals.
So now we wanted to share some advices about what can be done. And again, this is as recommendations that we are sharing as learners to advance in gastrointestinal research. To start, researchers need cultural humility. And we need to first start demonstrating respect for the diverse cultures and resilience of the cultural humility is essential, especially for non-Indigenous researchers when engaging with Indigenous community individuals and members and communities and members. And it's important to highlight that we cannot be fully competent in other cultures, especially Indigenous cultures. And then is when we approach them with cultural sensitiveness and humility. In addition, decolonization, we need to embrace decolonization, and there are different ways. And I'm going to recap one of the some of the concepts that I shared at the beginning of this webinar. One approach to embrace decolonization is to self-critical reflection on Western universalizing assumptions that we have because training or backgrounds. Relating to any sense of our human superiority over the environment and relationships. Relationships are key, and or how we relate to each other and with our environment, and with the land and the water and life, it's essential. And removing that assumption that we are on top of the environment and the land, we are part of the land, we belong to the land. The crucial importance of consensus is essential when working with members, and where non-Indigenous members can never overrule perspectives or opinions of Indigenous research team members. Interestingly, we have been talking about three or more essential concepts about the importance of time and resources, relationships, and reciprocity. And within that framework, we have some recommendations how we could advance in gastrointestinal research to work with the Indigenous community members. The first one, it's essential to start connecting with patients and family partners and key contacts from Indigenous communities. When engaging with them, it's very important to be listening to the concern, needs, and ideas of community members. And again, here is very important to go as leverage. We don't know everything, we are not cultural competent, and we're approaching to hear and learn. And then again, learning is a key component because in that way you can learn about the community, their stories, their history, their protocols, how to better engage with this community. In that way, we can start engaging and implementing cultural engagement principles throughout the project. And in that active learning and engagement, it's essential to learn basic principles, not only how to the protocols of the community, but at the same time, principles like the OCAP principles, ownership, control, access, and possession, or the importance of the sacred space and traditional knowledge. Or the 4 R's of Indigenous research, where respect, relevance, and reciprocity and responsibility are essential in each of the stages. In that way, you need, as researchers, we need to prioritize the role of community partners engaging in research as well as the role of ceremonies. So when appropriate and learning the protocols of the community that you are working with, then you can follow, do some ceremonies, essential, appropriate with the acknowledgement, smudging, the engagement of elders is essential in each of the steps of the research. And that's basically some recommendations that you can take and consider in addition to all that we have been sharing through this webinar. Once again, thank you to my colleagues, Robert, Melissa, and Rhonda for this webinar. And thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. We're looking forward for your comments and questions, observations.
Thank you, Juan-Nicolás. First of all, thank you to all our speakers, Juan-Nicolás, Robert, Rhonda, and Melissa. It's been a very enlightening presentation. And again, I'm encouraging all our attendees to please enter your questions into the chat box, and I'll field them out to our presenters. Just to get us started, I do have a question for Robert and Juan-Nicolás around the Indigenous Patient Advocacy Program. So I know that you mentioned there was going to be an assessment. Is that still ongoing, or is it complete? And have you been able to determine the effectiveness of this particular program?
Thank you, Ada, for that question. Yes, so we are working on the program.
Yeah, we've got some feelers out there right now, and actually, I've been contacted here recently by somebody that wants to share their views and stuff like that, and get involved with this. So that would be very exciting, and that's kind of what we're aiming for, to get started, get better at what we do here. So we're going to have our little hurdles to cross when we're starting, but very excited about how we can make this much better for our patients out there. So just to help them, because I know that when we were going through our struggles with our late daughter, that if we could have had somebody helping us go through what we went through and make it easier, it would have been so much better. So I'm just looking forward to making it better for people that are suffering.
Thank you. So yes, we are starting this project. It has been this 1 year of designing. Now we are finalizing the approval. We got funding, and we 4 Indigenous patient and family advocates who will be the peer navigators, and they are going to be working in close collaboration with the team members of the University of Saskatchewan Multidisciplinary IBD clinic. And that evaluation will take into consideration all Indigenous individuals who are interacting with them and are interested to be part of the project, to understand the impact and this model of having a peer guiding them in the system, help them with their condition and improving their well-being.
Great, thank you. And I guess along the same lines, and maybe if either Robert or Rhonda want to speak up, if there was any interest or opportunity to try to expand this type of program on a much more larger scale, do you feel that, is it still a little too early, or are there some suggestions that this could have a broader reaching impact beyond Saskatchewan?
I really feel that this is we're just getting started, and if this takes off and we can be of more help to more people, that would be great. I don't want to overload individual patient navigators, but we could get more people involved and more navigators involved to help, friend of a friend of a friend, and keep growing like that. This would be a wonderful experience for people that don't know what to do in these situations. They're scared. They don't know what to do. So by all means, we can expand. I would be very happy to be involved.
Great. I'm just looking to see if there are any more questions coming up. Yeah, so this one we're hearing, are there ways, and again, whoever feels appropriate to answer, but are there ways to share the research projects pertaining to Indigenous IBD patients? So are there suggestions on how we might be able to communicate more broadly about the types of research going on in IBD within Indigenous communities?
Thank you. I think that's an interesting question, how to better share the knowledge that we are generating. There is not a single way, and the traditional and Western way to do this is through conferences and publications, and that doesn't benefit the community members. So we are learning through this journey how to better share these results, and those are questions that we have in our research team. How can we share with community members who do not have IBD and all Indigenous communities? One thing that has been working is that after getting one of the first results, we were contacted by the media, by a Indigenous radio station and local media here in the province, and we co-delivered the results and the interviews with one of the Indigenous patient and family advocates. And that helped because interestingly, we got emails, very interesting, can I know more? That's one way. Another way that I think is very important is to go and visit communities, different communities, understanding their uniqueness and the diversity among communities, to share what we have done, and not with the aim of we want to get anything. It's actually we want to share and give this back to you, and find other ways of needs, search that's needed, or knowledge about this condition or other gastrointestinal conditions that are related to inflammatory bowel disease.
We also have the social media platform. I believe there's a Facebook page. We're hoping that it gets more active, just to get the word out there more, because it seems like this world is all social media now. So if we can get the word out there via that as well, maybe engage some of the younger youth, maybe not so prevalent in the older groups, but that's where we will engage the community face to face. Elders are more face to face as opposed to social media, but yeah, we're trying and we're hoping.
Yeah, that's great. And I guess, are there any resources, supports that Imagine as a network can help to provide to move your initiative forward, and either increasing communications? I noticed those videos you shared were excellent, and something we would very gladly promote via our social media channels. Are there other strategies or opportunities you feel that Imagine can provide and partner to move that forward?
Yeah, we'll be happy to have further support about sharing and broadcasting. I wanted to share that recently several members of the IBD Indigenous Peoples research team we were in an interview with members of Crohn's and Colitis Canada in Halifax, and an article, a note was published in the website. I think that's a good way to share with a community of patients and families about the work, and bring together. We are open to any new opportunities and ideas that come. So this is not limited to discussion. Everything started here, but I'm hearing that there is an interest to expand this across provinces.
Yeah,
but
we have
it requires time and resources and build relationships before further things can be done.
Well, we're getting a question about what is the Facebook page for your project. We have some people that are interested in following. If you don't have it handy, I'm happy to share it afterwards when we send out the survey, so everybody's got the link.
Yeah, I don't have it at the top of my fingers, and I don't think and I see Linda working, but maybe I think one of our research coordinators is online. If she can copy and paste it in the chat, that would be great. Jessica, if you can hear me, or we will share it after.
Absolutely,
for sure.
Whatever works. That's fine. Great. Okay, so I think we're nearing the top of the hour here. So again, a wonderful presentation from all of you. We really appreciate hearing your stories, learning of the research that's going on and these projects. I think they're very inspiring, and we really look forward to continuing our collaborations expanding our engagement with Indigenous communities moving forward. And if people have any questions following this webinar, please do feel free to send it to us, and we'll try to get answers from the presenters to get back to you. Again, I'll just open it up to Juan, Robert, Rhonda, Melissa. Any last comments, thoughts? Oh, great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate everybody's time, and look forward to our continued collaboration moving forward. And again, thank you to CIHR, whose obviously support for the network allows these events to take place. And please stay in touch. Look forward to hearing your feedback on this webinar. Take care, everyone. Bye now.
All right.
I thank you very much.